So what we're going to run through now in kind of like episode 2 is how our data looks, because we've cleaned it up. We've got 2023, 24, 25 season all the way through, but then we've had to add all of these different individual parts. So I just want to cover that, because in part 1 we basically just went through the starting point, how to extract the actual NHL API data. So all I did was basically use a Claude chat to say, hey, here's all the documentation on the API. Can you create a script that outputs all the data with as much detail as possible? So every play-by-play information that we have, all the players, timestamped, etc. Now, if you're creating a more simple base model, you don't really need to do that, but you can just upload the API documentation to Claude and just say, build a script that XYZ. And as long as you're super clear with what you want it to do, because it has all of their documentation already, it's really simple. So then this is just a checklist to myself, essentially. Then you want to extract all data for this season, and then obviously the second season later down the line. Clean and converter scripts if needed. So the reason why I have this converter script here, which I'm not going to get into detail of what it does, but essentially it just cleans it from a raw play-by-play to something that we can actually use for betting theories and creating like team ratings and player ratings and things like that. So there's a lot of things we don't need that I don't use personally. I know more advanced models will. Things like face-offs, for example. I don't use anything to do with face-offs, but that was in the data, as well as everything like stoppages and just raw data. I won't be able to open it here just because this file is the entire season. So it's 10 million rows long or so. So it's not going to open, especially when I'm running recording software as well. But that's to just give you an idea of what you get out. Then we build a converter script. And then after that, this creates these versions. So there's different levels to model complexity. So in this part 1, even though it's still in July, I wanted to get ahead of this. But this part 1 is basically getting all the data in a usable multiple version format. So these versions, for example, is where we say, okay, we have a really simple base model. It's not going to work on NHL, but does it just work in the terms of the processing the JSON, creating the team ratings, backtesting properly, etc. So I like to start super simple and just make sure it works rather than trying to aim for profitability first, because sometimes then you can just overfit things. So the next one is just like a manually data verification and dates alignment. So if we have a look at, say, let's go with this season. This one should open. I think this is about 2 million rows or so. Might take a sec. But this software is Replit I use. You can use anything. VSC is probably the most common one now, but obviously you can run it in literally anything. I'll pause this a sec and see if this loads. Whilst that's loading, we'll just run through what else we did. So verification is super important if you don't have an API. So say we built a scraper and we scraped all the data and it looked good for the first few games. That's what we, tested it individually on, and then we run an entire season or scraped an entire season. We would want to check this thoroughly, just because there might be 1 or 2 games, 1 or 2 teams even, that due to some like nuance, maybe like a player's name has a weird character, which is issues we had in the past, can kind of break things. So you just want to run through as many games as you can manually or semi-manually just to make sure it's correct. And make sure all the dates align as well. So being in the UK with everything usually on EST, in the US, if I have, say, an odds document, which I'll get to in a second, and then I upload those odds documents and create an append, what we call an append.py script that basically puts those odds for the games into the NHL data, because there's no odds in the NHL data. That can then mess up because we've either scraped or collected the odds, or just have the odds, but the dates that we've used are the UK dates, not the US dates. So obviously everything will be a bit messed up in that regards. So yeah, I'll show you this if this is loaded. Okay, great. So you can see we have this match info now. We have the date, we have the home team, away team, home odds, away odds. But you can see the home odds and away odds, I just use placeholders of 1.91. So this is to just come back and append to, which is this script. And then once these are all added in, we have this formatted 2024-25 with odds data. And the only difference between this and this doc is literally these are all correct. So if I go here, should have probably opened this one as well at the same time, but it's okay. This will basically show us that we have specific odds data. There's a spider in my so yeah, that's the only difference between those two documents. So then again, I like to check the full data sets as well, create the converter script, etc. This is basically a different league that we bet, Czech Republic. That's the original converter script, so we just use that as a baseline to convert off of. Check all matches are correct, matching with the results in NHL scores. So if we go to NHL scores and we go to some random date, for example, let's just say Jan 9, and then so you can see here home odds 235, away odds 168. I also wanted to put opening odds, and so this would be closing lines and this would be opening lines. So for a lot of games they are the same because we couldn't get the opening line data, but for some games they are different. So if you have a look, 156, 168, doesn't look like much of these are different, to be honest. Let's try a game in the middle. Okay, so you can see this is slightly different. Home odds 2.4, 2.43, 165, 165. So yeah, not a massive amount different, a little bit there. But if players are announced out really late or something like that, so this is a little bit of a move, you can see that like the odds can change. Because NHL is fairly sharp, the opening lines are never going to be miles off unless there is a really late goalie change or, you know, a star player's out or something like that. So in general, they're going to be pretty close to the open, so that's fine. I always use the closing lines just because we want to build the model to kind of combat liquidity issues. And if we use the opening lines, liquidity is going to be pretty low. You know, overnights, even for the NHL, is not that big. Okay, so then, for example, if we go all the way down, well, let's try and find a game in January. Should be around here somewhere. So 18th, Winnipeg, Calgary. Go up here. So Winnipeg, Calgary. So Flames 1-3-1. We can see here, winner, Calgary 3-1. They were away. This was the odds. This was the opening odds. So this moved quite a lot. So I would bet that maybe if we were to go into this game, Hellebuck didn't play for some reason. You can see big performance from the goalie as well. And yeah, so Hellebuck didn't play. So that line move is probably to do with people thinking that he was going to start, making the Jets basically 1.49. But then as soon as he's announced out, that line moves quite a bit. So he's worth X amount. Now, I don't know whether in this open he might have been, you know, doubtful or, you know, pending or something like that. But that's why we use closing lines, because otherwise this would be misleading because we wouldn't have this information. So when we look back and we build out goalie ratings in the future, if we would just say, okay, we would have known this player was starting and we could have bet it at 2.88 on the Flames, that's not really true because we don't know when this information came out. And we could obviously try and find out, but that's kind of above the scope for like a self-contained model. So this is what it looks like. This adding to the odds. You will need to collect the odds yourself. Now, we have a team member that does that, and we also just collected it from the last couple of seasons whilst betting different theories in the NHL. And even those simplified theories do really well. They just kind of don't bet many games. So that's what we're aiming to improve here. Of the appending script that we ran, which is this one here, it basically just says find the team and then add in the correct documents from a CSV that we have uploaded basically on the date. Once that gets added in, there's usually some gaps. Either we haven't collected them in the CSV or the Excel doc itself, or they just can't be aligned for some reason. So I just go through and manually update these. Most of the time, this is less than 100 games a season. So even though it does take, I don't know, 40 minutes for each season. It's just simpler than trying to mess around with going and finding the odds and scraping it and building like that. So I don't mind doing some stuff manually, even though most of this is self-contained. So then obviously I like to verify 1% of games as well. So just manually going through and saying, okay, did this happen? Does this make sense that the line moved because Hellebuck was out? And then XYZ. You don't have to do that, but if you have issues in the future and you haven't manually gone through 1-2% of games, it can be a massive issue, and it just increases like your personal confidence with the model as well. And then cleaned up the converter script so that output is in chronological order. Basically, it just wasn't at the start. And then we have our data sets ready for both seasons, with odds, without odds, the original data sets, which are too big to open in this doc, all from NHL API, and all within, I'd say, less than 20 hours, to be honest. I gave myself 5 days for this, which is massively overkill. If you're doing like proper flow state work, you won't need that long. And you can see, well, you can't, but this is the 27th, so July 27th today, and we're basically, whatever it is, 10 days ahead of schedule. The next part is going to be a simple model creation. So this is the really simple version that I mentioned before, what we bet for these 2 leagues. And it's basically going to be reviewing this converted formatted JSON doc, which is this one with the odds, into a model that we can use based on the logic of shot coordinates, so shot quality, things like that, and then running team-based Corsi and just tweaking that based on the Evolve Hockey ideas, which is a really good website to learn hockey analytics, things that matter. They have some really, really strong player data as well, which will be coming later in this kind of part 4 build, and then calibrate the model and see how close it gets to break even. So even you can see with this, building out this plan, I know this is not going to be enough to beat NHL closing lines, but I think it will likely be enough to break even or so, just because the juice between these lines is not that bad. So when we look at like a game that's, I don't know, pretty close, if this loads simply, you can see 1.95 both sides is really, really good. Whereas if we were to try and bet something in a different hockey league, you'd be looking at like 1.85 for both sides. So that means you have to be a lot sharper, even though the league is a lot easier to beat. So yeah, that's basically just something. Again, really close or narrow lines, which is usually a good sign if, well, it's a good sign for liquidity, because if a book is offering lines that are that close together, I should mention most of these are just Pinnacle closing lines, by the way. So if a book is offering lines that are that close together, it generally means that they're pretty sure of that number. So NHL, sort of like 1 hour before puck drop, is going to be pretty sharp. You know, game day NFL, same sort of thing. MLB lines can be really, really close together as well. It's just basically around liquidity. So if you can get 10 times the liquidity, you can basically narrow up these lines. If you're not sure about a particular sport or game, these are going to be a lot further apart, or basically the over round or the juice is going to be a lot more. So that's why that happens. So I don't think we're going to be able to make this profitable, but I think we can get close to break even, and I'll do another video in the future once this has kind of been completed. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about the main parts of the model, how we judge things like shot quality and how we judge things like team Corsi and what adjustments that we make, just because that's, you know, kind of important to us and our development. So yeah, hopefully this gives you a kind of idea of how the data can look after you've cleaned it up a bit. Obviously the player IDs we need to update in the future as well, but it's just not an issue. Okay, cheers.